Sophie Parker wiped her brow as she surveyed the Bellevue Hotel's grand ballroom, mentally checking off items from her ever-growing to-do list. 3 days before the Jenkins-Thompson rehearsal dinner, and the florist had just called to say the centerpieces might not match the bride's bouquet after all. It was just another fire to put out in what had already been the most demanding event of her budding career as an event coordinator. No, the tables need to be arranged in a semicircle, not rows, Sophie instructed the hotel staff, gesturing with her clipboard. Marcus and Jen want everyone to be able to see each other during the toasts. The staff nodded, immediately rearranging the furniture. Sophie had earned their respect quickly with her professionalism and clear vision. At 28, she had only been running her own event planning business for 2 years, but her attention to detail and calm under pressure had already earned her a growing reputation in Boston's social scene. Her phone buzzed again, probably the caterer with another question about the vegan options. Instead, it was her best friend Olivia, the bride's sister and maid of honor. "Soph, please tell me everything's under control." Olivia's voice had the slight edge of panic that had characterized her for the past month. "Of course it is," Sophie replied confidently, walking toward a quiet corner of the ballroom. "The rehearsal dinner is going to be perfect. I just need to confirm a few last-minute details with the groomsmen about their arrival times. That's actually why I'm calling. Marcus's best man just texted me. Apparently, one of the groomsmen is flying in tonight instead of tomorrow. Kyle Lawson. He wants to help with setup if needed." Sophie frowned, flipping through her notes. "Kyle Lawson. I don't think we've been introduced." "Oh, he's an old college friend of Marcus. Super busy with work, so he hasn't been around for most of the pre-wedding stuff. But Marcus says he's a great guy." "Well, tell him I'll put him to work if he really wants to help," Sophie laughed. "I'll be at the hotel until at least 9 tonight." After hanging up, Sophie returned to supervising the lighting installation, completely unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. At 7:30 that evening, Sophie was perched on a ladder, attempting to hang a stubborn string of fairy lights when she heard a deep voice behind her. "Need a hand with that?" Startled, Sophie nearly lost her balance, but strong hands quickly steadied the ladder. She looked down to see a tall man with dark hair and striking green eyes watching her with concern. "Careful there," he said with a gentle smile. "Those lights aren't worth a trip to the emergency room." Sophie carefully descended the ladder, straightening her blouse as she faced him. "Thanks for the save. The staff all disappeared for dinner and I got a little ambitious. I'm pretty tall. Let me help." Without waiting for her response, the man took the string of lights and easily reached up to hook them where she'd been struggling. "Perfect, thanks," Sophie said, extending her hand. "I'm Sophie Parker, the event coordinator." "Kyle Lawson," he replied, his handshake firm but gentle. "Friend of the groom." So this was the mysterious groomsman. Sophie took a moment to assess him. He was dressed simply in dark jeans and a navy blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. Nothing about him screamed wealth or power. He looked like any other 30-something professional, albeit an exceptionally attractive one. "Olivia mentioned you were coming in early. You really don't have to help, though. I'm sure you're tired from traveling." Kyle shrugged. "I've been sitting all day. It feels good to move around. Besides, Marcus has done more than his share of favors for me over the years. The least I can do is make sure his rehearsal dinner goes smoothly." Something about his easy demeanor made Sophie relax slightly. "Well, if you really want to help, those centerpiece prototypes need to be moved to the display table for final approval tomorrow." For the next 2 hours, Sophie was surprised by how seamlessly Kyle integrated himself into her workflow. He was methodical and efficient, asking smart questions and offering practical suggestions. When he suggested a slight rearrangement of the head table to improve the sightlines, Sophie had to admit it was an improvement. "You've got a knack for this," she commented, as they took a short break. "Ever consider a career in event planning?" Kyle laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the now empty ballroom. "I think I'll leave that to the professionals like you, but I do have some experience with spatial design and logistics. Let me guess, architect, engineer, something like that," he replied vaguely, then changed the subject. "So how do you know Jen and Marcus?" "Jen's sister, Olivia, has been my best friend since college. When they got engaged, Olivia insisted I take on the wedding events. Normally, I'd be hesitant to mix business with friendship, but they're such a great couple." Kyle nodded. "Marcus has always had good judgment. We met freshman year at Dartmouth when he saved me from completely embarrassing myself at our first college party." Sophie smiled, imagining a younger, perhaps less confident version of the composed man standing before her. "And you've stayed friends all this time?" "We have, though the last few years I haven't been as present as I should be. Work gets." He paused, demanding. "What do you do?" Sophie asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Before Kyle could answer, Sophie's phone rang. It was the hotel manager with questions about the next day's delivery schedule. By the time she finished the call, Kyle had glanced at his watch. "I should probably let you finish up and get some rest," he said. "Can I help with anything else before I go?" Sophie was surprised to feel a twinge of disappointment. "No, that's okay. You've been a huge help already. Thanks for jumping in." "My pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all comes together." He gave her a warm smile that made something flutter in her chest. "Maybe I'll see you here tomorrow." "I'll be the one running around with the clipboard and the slightly frantic expression," Sophie joked. Kyle laughed. "I'll keep an eye out." After he left, Sophie found herself thinking about their interaction as she gathered her things. There was something about Kyle Lawson, a quiet confidence combined with genuine kindness, that had made an impression on her. But she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She had a major event to coordinate, and developing a crush on one of the groomsmen was definitely not in her professional playbook. The next morning, Sophie arrived at the hotel early, coffee in hand and ready to tackle the day's extensive to-do list. The caterers were scheduled for noon, the florist for 2, and the final rehearsal would begin at 4. Everything needed to be perfect by then. She had just finished briefing the hotel staff when she spotted Kyle entering the ballroom, carrying 2 coffee cups and a small pastry bag. "Good morning," he called, approaching her with a smile. "I thought you might need reinforcements." He handed her one of the coffees. "The barista said it's what you ordered yesterday, vanilla latte, extra shot, no foam." Sophie blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "I ran into the hotel manager on my way in. He recognized me from last night and mentioned you always order the same thing." "That's really thoughtful, thank you." She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing slightly, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. Kyle shrugged as if it were nothing. "I figured event planning runs on caffeine and good karma. Consider it thanks for letting me feel useful last night." For a man who clearly wasn't hurting for money, based on his designer watch and the quality of his casual clothes, Kyle seemed remarkably down to earth. Sophie found herself wondering again what he did for a living, but before she could ask, the florist arrived early, looking flustered. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Kyle somehow became Sophie's unofficial assistant, helping with everything from directing delivery people to solving a crisis when the wrong linen napkins arrived. He seemed to anticipate problems before they fully materialized, and Sophie found herself increasingly impressed by his calm efficiency. During a rare quiet moment while the florist arranged the centerpieces, Sophie finally had a chance to chat with him again. "So, are you based in Boston?" she asked, sipping the now lukewarm coffee he'd brought her. "I split my time between here and New York," Kyle replied. "But I'm thinking about making Boston my primary base again. There's something about this city that feels like home." "I know what you mean. I grew up in Connecticut but came here for college and never wanted to leave." Their conversation was interrupted by Kyle's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "Sorry, I need to take this. Work never stops." Sophie nodded, watching as he stepped away to answer the call. His posture changed immediately, straighter, more commanding. She could only hear snippets of his conversation, but his tone had shifted from the friendly, easygoing man she'd been working with to something more authoritative. Words like acquisition, board approval, and shareholder meeting floated across the room. 20 minutes later he returned, looking slightly apologetic. "Sorry about that. Important business?" Sophie asked, curiosity piqued. "Nothing that can't wait until after the wedding," he said dismissively. "What's next on your list?" By the time the wedding party arrived for the rehearsal at 4 o'clock, the ballroom had been transformed. Soft lighting, elegant floral arrangements, and perfectly set tables created exactly the atmosphere the couple had requested. Sophie stood back, clipboard in hand, ready to guide everyone through the evening schedule. Marcus spotted Kyle immediately and pulled him into a bear hug. "Man, I didn't expect to see you until tonight. How long have you been here?" "Since last night," Kyle replied, clapping his friend on the back. "Been helping Sophie with the setup." Marcus looked between them with surprise. "Really? Kyle Lawson doing manual labor? This I have to hear about." Sophie laughed. "He's been a lifesaver, actually. Turns out your friend has hidden talents for event coordination." Jennifer, the bride, joined them, giving Kyle a warm hug. "So you've met our miracle worker. Isn't Sophie amazing? We'd be lost without her." Kyle's eyes met Sophie's over Jennifer's shoulder. "She certainly is impressive." Something in his gaze made Sophie's cheeks warm. She quickly glanced down at her clipboard. "We should get started with the rehearsal. Everyone needs to know their places and timing for tomorrow." As the wedding party assembled, Sophie noticed how seamlessly Kyle blended in with the group, despite apparently having been absent from much of the pre-wedding activities. He laughed easily with the other groomsmen, charmed the bridesmaids, and showed genuine interest in Marcus's parents' stories. The rehearsal went smoothly, and soon the larger group of guests began arriving for the dinner. Sophie moved efficiently around the room, making sure everything was perfect while remaining largely in the background. It was her job to be invisible yet omnipresent, solving problems before most people even realized they existed. She was checking on the kitchen's timing when Kyle appeared at her side. "Everything looks amazing," he said quietly. "You should be proud." "Thanks, but the real test is whether it all comes together tomorrow," Sophie replied, though she couldn't help feeling pleased by his praise. "Join us for a drink?" he asked. "You've earned a moment to enjoy your hard work." Sophie shook her head. "I don't usually socialize at events I'm coordinating. It's better if I stay focused." "One drink," he insisted. "Marcus and Jen specifically asked me to drag you away from your clipboard for at least 10 minutes. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but just briefly." Kyle led her to the bar and ordered them both sparkling water with lime, "so you can stay sharp," he explained with a wink that made her heart skip. As they stood slightly apart from the main group, Sophie found herself relaxing for the first time all day. Kyle had a way of making her feel both at ease and slightly off balance, in the most intriguing way. "So how did you get into event planning?" he asked. I was always the friend who organized everything in college parties, study groups, spring break trips. After graduation, I worked for a corporate events company, but I wanted to focus on more personal celebrations. There's something special about being part of people's most important moments. Kyle nodded. I can see that. You have a gift for it, noticing all the details while never losing sight of the bigger picture. What about you? Sophie asked, seizing her opportunity. What exactly do you do that keeps you traveling between Boston and New York? Before Kyle could answer, Olivia bounded over, slightly tipsy and full of excitement. Sophie, everything is perfect. She threw her arms around her friend. Kyle, are you bothering my bestie with boring business talk? Because this woman deserves a night off, Kyle laughed. Just getting to know the mastermind behind all this. Well, she's the best in the business, Olivia declared proudly. She's going to be planning celebrity weddings before we know it. Sophie gently extracted herself from Olivia's embrace. I should check on the dessert timing. Kyle, thanks for the drink. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her. Part of her professional training was to maintain boundaries with clients and their guests, but something about Kyle Lawson made her want to bend her own rules. The rest of the evening proceeded flawlessly. Toasts were given, meals were enjoyed, and the couple was properly celebrated. As the event wound down, Sophie supervised the cleanup crew while the wedding party moved to the hotel bar to continue their celebration. She was just about to head home when Kyle approached her by the elevator. Leaving already? He asked. My job here is done, she replied with a tired smile. Tomorrow's the main event, so I need to get some rest. You've done an amazing job, Sophie. His voice was sincere. I'm impressed. Thank you for all your help, she said, suddenly feeling shy under his intense gaze. Kyle seemed to hesitate, then asked, Would you have dinner with me? After the wedding is over, of course. Sophie blinked in surprise. Dinner? Yes, that meal people typically enjoy in the evening, he teased gently. Just the two of us. Every professional instinct told Sophie to politely decline. She never dated clients or anyone connected to them. It was one of her firm rules. But Kyle wasn't technically her client, and there was something about him. I'd like that, she heard herself say. His smile broadened. Great. I'll get your number from Olivia if that's okay. Sophie nodded, unable to stop her own smile. Good night, Kyle. Good night, Sophie. As the elevator doors closed between them, Sophie leaned against the wall, her heart racing with an excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. She barely knew Kyle Lawson, yet somehow he'd managed to break through her professional composure in a way no one had before. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather and minimal crises. Sophie moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, directing vendors, soothing nerves, and ensuring every detail was perfect. The ceremony in the hotel's garden was beautiful, the cocktail hour elegant, and the reception in full swing by 8 o'clock. Sophie allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she watched the bride and groom's first dance. This was why she loved her job, creating the setting for moments that would become treasured memories. Another success, came Kyle's voice from beside her. She turned to find him looking devastatingly handsome in his groomsman's tuxedo. The night's not over yet. Anything could still go wrong. Ever the optimist, he teased, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I prefer prepared professional, she countered with a smile. Well, misprepared professional, save me a dance later. Once you're satisfied everything's running smoothly. Sophie hesitated. I don't usually break your own rules, I know, he finished for her. Consider it a celebration of a job well done. Before she could respond, the wedding planner needed her assistance with a seating confusion, and Sophie was pulled away. Throughout the evening, however, She was acutely aware of Kyle across the room laughing with friends, dancing with the bridesmaids, giving a heartfelt toast to the couple that had everyone both laughing and wiping away tears. Around 10:30, when the cake had been cut and the dance floor was packed, Sophie finally allowed herself to relax. Everything had gone according to plan, and the few minor issues had been handled smoothly. She was standing by the bar, sipping her first glass of champagne of the night when Kyle appeared. "I believe you promised me a dance," he said, extending his hand. "Did I actually promise?" Sophie raised an eyebrow but found herself placing her hand in his. "Close enough," Kyle replied, leading her to the dance floor as the band began playing a slow song. His hand rested lightly on her waist as they began to move to the music, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow still felt intimate. Sophie couldn't remember the last time she danced with someone who made her feel both completely comfortable and thrillingly aware of every point of contact between them. "So," she said, looking up at him, "are you going to tell me what you do for a living, or is it some kind of state secret?" Kyle laughed. "Nothing so exciting. I run a company." "What kind of company?" "It's called Lawson Innovations. We develop sustainable building technologies." Sophie's steps faltered slightly. "Lawson Innovations, the clean energy company," Kyle nodded, watching her reaction carefully. "But you're the CEO," he finished for her, his expression somewhat wary. "Yes." Sophie stared at him, processing this information. Lawson Innovations was regularly featured in business magazines and news reports, a multi-billion-dollar corporation at the forefront of green technology. And she'd had its CEO hanging fairy lights and arranging tables. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, finding her voice. Kyle shrugged, the movement fluid under his perfectly tailored jacket. "It didn't seem relevant. I'm here as Marcus's friend, not as a CEO." "But I had you moving furniture and dealing with catering issues. And I enjoyed every minute of it," he said sincerely. It was refreshing to be useful in a completely different way than usual. Sophie shook her head, still processing. "I feel like I should apologize for putting you to work." "Please don't. I volunteered, remember?" His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Besides, it gave me a chance to spend time with you." The way he said it, direct yet gentle, made her pulse quicken. Most people would have mentioned the whole CEO thing within the first 5 minutes of conversation. "I'm not most people," Kyle replied simply. "No," Sophie agreed, meeting his gaze. "You're definitely not." They danced in silence for a moment, Sophie's mind racing with questions. Finally, she couldn't help herself. "So do you often help event planners hang decorations, or am I special?" A slow smile spread across Kyle's face. "Definitely special." The song ended, but neither of them moved to separate. As the band transitioned to another slow number, Kyle's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, but when it buzzed again immediately, he sighed. "I'm sorry, I should check this. It might be important." Sophie stepped back. "Of course." Kyle checked his phone, his expression darkening slightly. "I need to make a call. Will you excuse me for a few minutes?" "Go ahead," Sophie said, trying not to feel disappointed. "I should check in with the catering staff anyway." By the time Sophie had confirmed that dessert service was complete and the late-night snacks were ready, Kyle had returned, looking apologetic. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just a situation at our Singapore office that needs attention," he explained. "Nothing catastrophic, but I'll need to handle some calls early tomorrow morning." Sophie nodded, understanding the demands of his position in a new light. The responsibilities of running a global corporation. "One of the less glamorous aspects," he agreed, then his expression softened. "But right now, I'm more concerned with confirming our dinner plans. Are you free tomorrow night?" The question reminded Sophie that despite his CEO status, Kyle was still just a man asking her to dinner, a very attractive, surprisingly down-to-earth man who had spent hours helping her hang fairy lights and arrange place settings. "I am," she confirmed with a smile. "Good. I know a great place in the North End. I'll pick you up at 7. I'll text you my address." The wedding continued late into the night, but Sophie maintained her professional distance for the remainder, only exchanging meaningful glances with Kyle across the room. As the festivities wound down and she supervised the final vendor departures, Kyle approached her one last time. "Need any help with the cleanup?" he asked, his tie loosened and jacket discarded, looking somehow even more attractive in his slightly disheveled state. Sophie laughed. "I think you've done more than enough manual labor for one weekend, Mr. CEO. Back to formalities now that you know my job title." He raised an eyebrow. "Just trying to give you the respect your position deserves," she teased. Kyle stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I much preferred when you were ordering me around about table placements." Their eyes locked, and Sophie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Well, in that case, the vases need to be packed and inventoried before the florist picks them up tomorrow." Kyle grinned. "Yes, madam." They worked side by side for another hour, their conversation flowing easily from wedding details to their favorite Boston restaurants to debates about the best season in New England. By the time everything was properly packed and labeled, it was nearly 3 in the morning. "You should get some rest," Sophie told him, knowing he had early morning calls to make. "I just need to do a final walkthrough, then I'm done too." Kyle hesitated. "Let me walk you to your car when you're finished." "That's not necessary, humor me," he interrupted gently. "It's late, and I'd feel better knowing you got to your car safely." Something in his tone told Sophie it wasn't worth arguing. "Okay, give me 15 minutes. True to his word, Kyle waited patiently while Sophie completed her final checks. As they walked through the quiet hotel lobby and out into the cool night air, their shoulders occasionally brushed, sending little sparks of awareness through Sophie. "My car's just in the parking garage," she said, gesturing across the street. Kyle insisted on walking her all the way to her vehicle, opening her car door with an old-fashioned courtesy that made Sophie smile despite herself. "Thank you for everything," she said, turning to face him before getting in. Most groomsmen don't do much beyond showing up on time and remembering their lines. "Most event planners probably wouldn't let a groomsman help," Kyle countered. "You're very good at what you do, Sophie." "I've been to events organized by professionals who charge 10 times what I'm guessing you do, and none of them pulled off something this seamless." The compliment, delivered with such sincerity, warmed her from within. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Kyle leaned slightly closer, and Sophie found herself holding her breath. But instead of kissing her, he simply tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering briefly on her cheek. "Tomorrow at 7, he said softly. "Tomorrow at 7, she echoed, sliding into her car. As she drove home, Sophie found herself replaying the entire weekend in her mind. Never in her professional career had she experienced such an immediate connection with someone, let alone a client's friend, who turned out to be the CEO of a major corporation. There was something about Kyle that defied her expectations: his willingness to help with menial tasks, his genuine interest in her work, the way he'd kept his professional status quiet to be treated like anyone else. But a small voice in her head cautioned her not to get ahead of herself. One dinner didn't mean anything serious, and men in Kyle's position were used to getting what they wanted. Still, she couldn't help the flutter of excitement at the thought of seeing him again. Sophie slept late the next morning, exhausted from the long wedding weekend. When she finally checked her phone around 11, she found a text from Kyle. "Good morning. Looking forward to tonight. Hope you're getting some well-deserved rest." The simple message made her smile. She replied, "Just woke up. Apparently coordinating weddings and dancing with CEOs is tiring work." His response came quickly. "The dancing was definitely my favorite part. See you at 7. Sophie spent the day in a pleasant daze, catching up on household chores and trying not to overthink her upcoming date. Around 5, she began the process of getting ready, settling on a simple but elegant navy blue dress that complemented her auburn hair and fair skin. At precisely 7 o'clock, her doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, Sophie opened the door to find Kyle standing there in dark trousers and a light gray cashmere sweater, holding a small bouquet of lilies. "Hi," she said, suddenly feeling shy. "Hi," he replied, his eyes taking her in appreciatively. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." "Come in for a minute while I put these in water." Kyle stepped into her modest apartment, glancing around with interest. Sophie felt momentarily self-conscious. Her place was comfortable, but certainly not luxurious, with second-hand furniture and DIY decorations that reflected her creative spirit but limited budget. "I like your place," Kyle said, examining a gallery wall of photographs. "Did you take these?" "Yes, photography's a hobby of mine," Sophie replied, placing the flowers in a vase. "Nothing professional." "They're really good," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. "You have an eye for composition." The simple compliment meant more to Sophie than he could know. Her ex-boyfriend had always dismissed her creative pursuits as cute little hobbies. "Ready to go?" Kyle asked. The restaurant, a small Italian place tucked away on a side street in the North End, was clearly a local favorite rather than a tourist spot. The maitre d' greeted Kyle by name and led them to a corner table where they could talk without shouting over the lively dining room noise. "You come here often?" Sophie asked after they were seated. "Whenever I'm in Boston," Kyle confirmed. "Marco, the owner, was my dad's friend. They went to school together in Italy before my dad moved to the States." "That's nice. I love places with personal connections," Sophie said, looking around at the warm, inviting space. As they studied their menus, Kyle added casually, "The chef makes a carbonara that isn't on the menu. It's the best I've ever had, including in Rome." "Sold," Sophie said, closing her menu with a smile. After ordering, with Kyle speaking fluid Italian to their waiter, they settled into conversation that flowed as easily as the excellent wine he had selected. "So now that I know about your secret CEO identity, tell me how that happened," Sophie prompted. "Did you always want to run a green tech company?" Kyle swirled his wine thoughtfully. "Not exactly. I studied engineering and business at Dartmouth, then worked for a traditional energy company for a few years. But I saw firsthand how destructive some of those practices were and wanted to be part of the solution instead of the problem. So you started your own company." "With my father," Kyle nodded. "He had a small construction business but was always interested in innovation. We started developing more sustainable building materials together. When that took off, we expanded into renewable energy solutions." "That's impressive," Sophie said sincerely. Kyle shrugged. "It was good timing and a lot of hard work. My father passed away 5 years ago, and since then I've been focusing on growing our international presence." He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't usually talk about work this much on dates." "I asked," Sophie reminded him. "Besides, it's interesting. You're clearly passionate about what you do." "I am," Kyle admitted. "But tonight I'm more interested in you. How did Sophie Parker become Boston's best event coordinator?" Sophie laughed. "I think that's a slight exaggeration." "Based on what I've seen, it's not," Kyle said seriously. You have a rare combination of creativity and practical organization." The conversation continued through their excellent meal, moving easily from career ambitions to childhood memories to favorite books and films. Sophie was struck by how attentively Kyle listened, asking thoughtful follow-up questions and remembering small details she mentioned. "Any siblings?" he asked as they shared a tiramisu. "One younger brother. He's in graduate school in California marine biology. What about you?" "I'm an only child," Kyle replied, "which probably contributed to my workaholic tendencies. No one to share the responsibility with." "Is that how you see yourself? As a workaholic?" Kyle considered the question. "I used to wear it like a badge of honor. Lately, though, I've been rethinking my priorities." "What prompted that?" Sophie asked, genuinely curious. His eyes met hers. "Life's too short to spend it all in boardrooms and hotel conference centers." There was something in his gaze that made Sophie's heart beat faster. Before she could respond, Marco appeared at their table, greeting Kyle warmly and insisting on bringing them homemade limoncello to finish their meal. As they sipped the sweet liqueur, Sophie found herself wishing the evening wouldn't end. Being with Kyle was surprisingly easy despite his wealth and status. He had a grounded quality that made her feel completely comfortable. When the bill came, Kyle didn't make a show of his wealth, simply handling it discreetly and thanking the staff graciously. Outside, the spring night was cool but pleasant, and Kyle suggested walking for a while before driving her home. Sophie agreed readily, and they strolled through the charming North End streets, their hands occasionally brushing until Kyle gently took hers in his. "Is this okay?" he asked quietly. Sophie nodded, enjoying the warm strength of his fingers interlaced with hers. "It's nice." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, then Kyle spoke. "I have to go to New York tomorrow for a few days." "Oh," Sophie tried not to sound disappointed. "Business?" "Yes, board meetings and some investor presentations. I should be back by the weekend, though." He hesitated. "Would you be free Friday night? Maybe I could cook dinner for you." "You cook?" Sophie asked, surprised. Kyle smiled. "Another hidden talent." "I'm not claiming to be a chef, but I can manage a decent meal." "I'd like that," Sophie said, feeling a flutter of anticipation. They continued walking, chatting about their favorite neighborhoods in Boston and New York, until they eventually circled back to where Kyle had parked his car, a sleek, but not ostentatious Audi. The drive back to Sophie's apartment was too short for her liking. When they arrived, Kyle came around to open her door and walk her to her building entrance. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said, his voice low. "So did I," Sophie replied honestly. Kyle stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her face. "May I kiss you goodnight?" The formal request made her smile. "Yes, you may." His lips met hers softly at first, then with growing intensity as Sophie responded, her hands moving to his shoulders. The kiss was better than she had imagined, tender yet passionate, leaving her slightly breathless when they finally pulled apart. "I'll call you tomorrow," Kyle promised, his forehead resting against hers. "I'll answer," Sophie replied with a smile. After one more quick kiss, Sophie entered her building, turning to wave before the door closed between them. She leaned against the wall of the lobby, touching her lips gently with her fingertips, feeling like a teenager after a perfect first date. True to his word, Kyle called the next day just as Sophie was finishing lunch with a potential client. "Is this a bad time?" he asked when she answered. "Not at all, just finished a meeting," Sophie replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "How's your day going?" "Hectic. About to board a flight to New York, but I wanted to hear your voice before I left." The simple admission made Sophie's heart flutter. "Well, I'm glad you called." "Me too," Kyle said softly. "I had a really great time last night, so did I." I should be back in Boston Thursday night. Still on for Friday? Definitely, Sophie confirmed. Great, I'll text you my address. It's in Back Bay. There was a pause, then he added, I've been thinking about that kiss all day. Sophie felt her cheeks warm. Me too. They talked for a few more minutes until Kyle had to board his flight, and Sophie found herself smiling long after they hung up. The next 3 days passed in a blur of client meetings and event planning for Sophie, interspersed with text messages, and one late-night phone call from Kyle. He was clearly busy with his meetings in New York, but made a point of staying in touch, sending her a photo of the view from his office or asking about her day. By Friday evening, Sophie was both nervous and excited as she took an Uber to the address Kyle had sent her. She had expected something impressive, but the elegant brownstone in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods still took her breath away. Kyle opened the door before she could ring the bell, looking casual yet sophisticated in dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt. His face lit up at the sight of her. "Hi," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Come in." Sophie stepped into a spacious foyer with gleaming hardwood floors and tasteful artwork on the walls. "Your home is beautiful." "Thank you." "It was actually my grandparents' house," Kyle explained, taking her coat. "I renovated it a few years ago to update the systems but kept as much of the original character as possible." He gave her a brief tour of the main floor, which featured high ceilings, elegant furnishings, and modern technology seamlessly integrated into the historic architecture. In the gourmet kitchen, Sophie found evidence of his promised cooking efforts: vegetables neatly chopped on a cutting board, a pot simmering on the stove, and a bottle of wine already breathing on the counter. "It smells amazing in here," Sophie commented. "Nothing fancy, just a mushroom risotto," Kyle said with a touch of modesty that Sophie found endearing. "Can I pour you some wine?" They chatted easily while Kyle finished preparing dinner, Sophie sitting on a stool at the kitchen island watching him work. He moved with confidence around the kitchen, explaining that he'd learned to cook from his Italian grandmother. "She believed every person should know how to feed themselves and others properly," he said, stirring the risotto. "During college breaks, I'd spend weeks in her kitchen, learning all her recipes." "That's a wonderful legacy," Sophie replied. "My grandmother was more of a why cook when there's perfectly good takeout kind of woman." Kyle laughed. Different but equally valid life philosophy. Dinner was served in a cozy dining room with candles providing most of the light. The risotto was delicious, creamy, and flavorful, and paired perfectly with the wine Kyle had selected. "This is incredible," Sophie said after her first bite. "You weren't kidding about your cooking skills." "I'm glad you like it," Kyle replied, looking pleased. "How was your week?" As they ate, Sophie told him about a challenging new client who wanted a Great Gatsby-themed anniversary party, but with modern elements that seemed to contradict the entire concept. Kyle listened attentively, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. "Enough about my event planning dramas," Sophie said eventually. "How were your meetings in New York?" "Productive but exhausting," Kyle replied. "We're launching a new residential solar technology next quarter, so there's been a lot of investor education to do." "That sounds important." "It is, but also, I found myself distracted a lot," he admitted, meeting her eyes. "Thinking about you." The directness of his statement caught Sophie off guard. "Really? Really?" Kyle reached across the table to take her hand. "I know we haven't known each other long, but there's something about you, Sophie. I haven't felt this way about someone in a very long time." His honesty emboldened her. "I feel the same way," she confessed. "Which is a little scary, honestly." "Scary?" Kyle's thumb traced circles on her palm. "You're not exactly what I expected to find at a wedding I was coordinating," Sophie explained. A CEO of a major corporation who's also genuinely kind and unpretentious and really good at hanging fairy lights. Kyle laughed. What can I say? I contain multitudes. After dinner, they moved to Kyle's living room where a gas fireplace provided warm, flickering light. Sitting close together on the comfortable sofa, their conversation continued to flow, punctuated by increasingly passionate kisses as the evening progressed. Stay, Kyle whispered against her lips as their latest kiss ended. Seeing her hesitation, he quickly added, just to sleep. It's getting late and I'd like to make you breakfast in the morning. Sophie considered the offer. She wasn't ready for their evening to end, but she also didn't want to rush things. Just to sleep, she agreed softly. Kyle smiled, kissing her gently. I can lend you something to sleep in. That night, wearing one of Kyle's t-shirts that fell to her knees, Sophie lay beside him in his king-sized bed, her head on his chest as his fingers gently stroked her hair. There was something profoundly intimate about the moment, more so, somehow, than if they had made love. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Kyle murmured in the darkness. Sophie thought for a moment. Sometimes I worry that I'll always be the person creating beautiful moments for other people's milestones, but never experiencing them myself. Kyle's arms tightened around her. That's not going to happen. How can you be so sure? Because you deserve those moments too, he said simply. And someday, someone is going to make them happen for you. The conviction in his voice made Sophie's eyes sting with unexpected tears. Your turn. Tell me something you've never told anyone. Kyle was quiet for so long that Sophie wondered if he would answer. Finally, he spoke. I'm lonely a lot of the time. I have this big house, a successful company, more money than I could ever spend. But most nights I come home to emptiness. The vulnerability in his confession touched something deep inside Sophie. She leaned up to kiss him softly. Not tonight. No, he agreed, smiling against her lips. Not tonight. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Sophie slept through the night without waking once. Morning brought sunlight streaming through Kyle's bedroom windows, and the smell of coffee wafting upstairs. Sophie found Kyle in the kitchen, making pancakes and looking unfairly attractive in pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair slightly rumpled. Good morning, he greeted her with a smile. Sleep well. Better than I have in ages, Sophie admitted, accepting the coffee mug he offered. Those pancakes smell amazing. Family recipe, Kyle explained. The secret is buttermilk and a touch of vanilla. They ate breakfast on Kyle's terrace, enjoying the spring morning and planning their day together. Kyle suggested a walk along the Charles River, followed by a visit to a small art gallery in South End that was featuring a photographer he thought Sophie would appreciate. The day unfolded exactly as planned, relaxed and enjoyable, with Kyle showing Sophie parts of Boston she'd never explored despite having lived there for years. They held hands as they walked, talked about everything and nothing, and stopped for impromptu kisses whenever the mood struck. By evening, when they returned to Kyle's house, Sophie felt as though they'd known each other for months rather than days. There was an ease between them that she'd never experienced with anyone else. Over takeout Thai food, Kyle insisting he couldn't cook every meal. They talked about their childhoods, Kyle's privileged, but often lonely upbringing with busy professional parents, and Sophie's more modest but warm family life in suburban Connecticut. My parents wanted me to be a lawyer or doctor, Sophie confessed. They're still a little bewildered by the event planning business, but they're coming around. What do they think about your success? Kyle asked. Sophie laughed. They're proud but confused. My mom still sends me job listings for real careers occasionally. And what about your family? Sophie asked. Were they supportive of your career choices? My father was my business partner, so absolutely, Kyle replied. My mother was more concerned that I worked too much. She still is, actually. She lives in Florida now, but calls regularly to remind me that life isn't all about work. Wise woman, Sophie commented. She'd like you, Kyle said, his eyes warm. You both have the same way of cutting through my workaholic nonsense. That night, their relationship deepened in every way, as they made love with a connection that left them both breathless. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Sophie felt a sense of rightness that both thrilled and terrified her. "What are you thinking?" Kyle asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That this is all happening very fast," Sophie admitted, "and that I don't want it to stop." Kyle kissed her forehead. "Then let's not stop. Let's just be together and see where this goes." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of togetherness whenever their schedules allowed. Kyle had to travel for business occasionally, but always made sure to call or text multiple times a day when he was away. When he was in Boston, they spent nearly every evening together, alternating between his house and her apartment. Sophie was touched by how comfortable Kyle seemed in her much more modest home, never making her feel self-conscious about the difference in their living situations. He brought over his chef's knife to cook for her, commenting only that her kitchen was cozy and efficient, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about her budget-conscious decorating choices. 1 month into their relationship, Kyle invited Sophie to accompany him to a charity gala where Lawson Innovations was a major sponsor. It would be their first public appearance together in his professional world. "You don't have to come if it feels uncomfortable," he assured her. "These events can be tedious and the business talk boring." "I'd like to see this side of your life," Sophie replied honestly. "Besides, I'm a professional event planner. I should see how the high-end corporate galas are done." The night of the event, Kyle picked her up in a sleek town car with a driver a level of luxury Sophie wasn't accustomed to. She had spent more than she should have on a floor-length emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair, wanting to look appropriate for the occasion. When Kyle saw her, his expression made every penny worth it. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sophie replied, admiring his perfectly tailored tuxedo. At the gala, held in the ballroom of Boston's most exclusive hotel, Sophie quickly realized that Kyle was not just successful but a genuine power player in the business world. People approached him constantly, other executives, politicians, even a few celebrities, all eager for a moment of his time. What impressed her most was how he handled it all. Kyle was unfailingly polite but never obsequious, and he made sure to include Sophie in every conversation, his hand resting lightly on her lower back in a gesture that felt both protective and proud. "And what do you do, Miss Parker?" asked the wife of a major tech CEO during one such interaction. "I run my own event planning business, specializing in weddings and milestone celebrations," Sophie replied confidently. "How fascinating," the woman said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What an interesting hobby." Before Sophie could correct the misconception, Kyle spoke up. "Sophie's company is one of the most sought-after event planning services in Boston. She created the most flawless wedding weekend I've ever attended just last month." The warmth and pride in his voice made Sophie fall a little bit more in love with him in that moment. As they moved through the crowd, Kyle whispered in her ear, "Having second thoughts about dating a CEO. The social obligations can be tedious." "Not at all," Sophie replied honestly. "Though I am taking mental notes on how they've arranged the silent auction. It's actually quite clever." Kyle laughed, pulling her closer. "Always the professional. That's one of the things I love about you." The word love hung between them, unacknowledged but undeniable. Neither had said it explicitly yet, but Sophie felt it growing stronger with each passing day. Later that evening, as they slow danced to the live band, Kyle murmured against her hair, "Thank you for coming tonight." "Thank you for wanting me here," Sophie replied. "There's nowhere I'd rather you be than with me," Kyle said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "I love you, Sophie. I know it's fast, but I've never been more certain of anything." Sophie's heart soared at the words. "I love you too," she whispered back, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. Their kiss on the dance floor attracted a few curious glances, but neither of them noticed or cared. The following weeks brought both joy and challenges as they navigated the realities of their different lives and schedules. Kyle had to travel to Europe for a week on business, leaving Sophie to manage a particularly demanding client whose daughter's Sweet 16 had turned into an event worthy of a reality TV show. When Kyle returned, jet-lagged but happy to see her, he surprised Sophie by suggesting they take a weekend trip to Cape Cod. "I have a small place in Chatham," he explained. "Nothing fancy, just a cottage my grandfather built. I thought we could use some time away from the city." The cottage turned out to be a charming 3-bedroom house with a wrap-around porch and private beach access. It was smaller than Kyle's Boston home but still lovely, filled with comfortable furniture and family photos. "This is where I come to decompress," Kyle explained as he showed her around. "No one from work knows about it, not even my assistant." "It's beautiful," Sophie said sincerely, touched that he was sharing this private retreat with her. They spent the weekend walking on the beach, cooking simple meals together, and talking for hours about their hopes and dreams. On Saturday night, sitting on the porch swing watching the sunset over the water, Kyle brought up a topic they'd been dancing around. "I'm thinking about scaling back my travel schedule," he said, his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe delegate some of the international meetings to my executive team." "Because of us?" Sophie asked, both pleased and concerned. "Partly," Kyle admitted. "But also because I'm ready for more balance in my life. The company is stable enough now that I don't need to be everywhere all the time." Sophie nodded, understanding. "I've been thinking about my business too. I want to grow, but I also want time for a personal life. Maybe I need to hire an assistant, start being more selective about the events I take on." Kyle kissed the top of her head. "Whatever you decide, I support you completely. Your business is important, and I would never want you to scale back just for me." His understanding meant everything to Sophie. Previous boyfriends had often seemed threatened by her ambition, or had expected her to prioritize their schedules over her clients' needs. Kyle's respect for her career was yet another reason she was falling deeper in love with him. They returned to Boston closer than ever, both emotionally and in their thinking about the future. 2 months into their relationship, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sophie had her own drawer at Kyle's house and a toothbrush in his bathroom, while he kept clothes at her apartment for the nights they spent there. Their friends had all met and approved of the relationship, with Olivia taking particular pleasure in having match-made the power couple. As she put it, though, Sophie and Kyle reminded her that they had found each other without her direct intervention. "Details, details," Olivia dismissed with a wave of her hand during a double date with her boyfriend. "The point is, you two are perfect together and I'm taking full credit." One Tuesday evening, Sophie was working late at her apartment, finalizing details for an upcoming corporate anniversary party when her phone rang. It was Kyle. "Hey, are you still working?" he asked, sounding oddly nervous. "Just finishing up," Sophie replied. "Everything okay?" "Yes, just." "Can you come over? There's something I want to talk to you about." The seriousness in his tone made Sophie's stomach twist with anxiety. "You're worrying me. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Kyle assured her quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I just need to see you." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Sophie promised. The drive to Kyle's house felt longer than usual, her mind racing with possibilities. They had been so happy, surely he wasn't ending things. But what else would require such an urgent, serious conversation? When she arrived, Kyle opened the door immediately, as if he'd been watching for her. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Sophie had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "Come in," he said, kissing her briefly. "Let's go sit down." He led her to the living room, where Sophie noticed a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket, not a typical setup for a breakup conversation. She thought with relief. Kyle took both her hands in his expression serious but his eyes warm. "Sophie, these past few months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she said softly. "Before I met you, I thought I had everything figured out. My company was successful, I had achieved more professionally than I ever dreamed possible. But something was missing." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "You showed me what that was." Sophie's heart began to race as Kyle continued. "I know it hasn't been long, but when something is right, you just know." He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Sophie Parker, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring, simple yet elegant, exactly Sophie's taste. For a moment she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, tears filling her eyes, she nodded. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Kyle's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a passionate kiss. When they finally separated, both breathless, he reached for the champagne. "I was so nervous," he admitted, popping the cork. "We haven't known each other that long, and I was afraid you might think it was too soon." Sophie looked at the ring sparkling on her finger, then back at the man she loved. "It is soon," she acknowledged, "but it's also right. I've never been more certain of anything." They toasted their engagement, both giddy with happiness. As they discussed calling their families to share the news, Sophie couldn't help laughing at how her life had changed in just a few short months. "What's so funny?" Kyle asked, pulling her onto his lap. "I was just thinking about how we met," Sophie explained. "If someone had told me when I was hanging those fairy lights that I'd be engaged to one of the groomsmen by summer, I would have said they were crazy." "And if they'd told you he was a CEO," Kyle teased. "I would have laughed even harder," Sophie admitted. "But here we are." "Here we are," Kyle agreed, kissing her softly. "And I wouldn't change a thing." Their wedding, 6 months later, was everything Sophie had dreamed of creating for her clients but had never imagined for herself. They chose to marry at Kyle's Cape Cod cottage, with just family and close friends in attendance. Sophie, drawing on her professional expertise, planned much of it herself, though Kyle insisted she hire another coordinator for the day itself. "So you can actually enjoy being the bride," he explained. The ceremony took place on the beach at sunset, Sophie radiant in a simple silk gown, Kyle handsome and emotional as he watched her walk toward him. Their vows, written by themselves, spoke of love found unexpectedly and treasured deeply. Marcus served as Kyle's best man, while Olivia stood beside Sophie as maid of honor, both taking partial credit for the match during their reception speeches. At the reception, held under a tent on the cottage lawn, Kyle pulled Sophie onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she replied, leaning back to look into his eyes. "Though I just realized something." "What's that?" "I spent years coordinating other people's perfect moments, but I never could have planned this us into existence." Sometimes the best things happen when you don't have a detailed checklist. Kyle laughed, spinning her gently. Well, as the man who fell in love with the event coordinator while hanging fairy lights, I have to agree. The best things in life can't be planned. But they can be celebrated, Sophie added, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved, Sophie reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance meeting at a rehearsal dinner to a lifetime commitment, their story had unfolded with a swiftness that defied convention, but felt undeniably right. Sophie Parker had always been in the business of creating perfect moments for others. Now, in the arms of her CEO husband who'd fallen for her faster than either of them expected, she was finally experiencing the most perfect moment of her own.